The twin moons of Virelia hung low in the violet sky, casting soft light across the shimmering silver forests. The air was calm, but underneath the peace, fear had begun to spread like wildfire. For thousands of years, the Virelians had lived in harmony. Their world was gentle, its storms soft, its creatures kind, its oceans glowing under starlight. They were a people of beauty and art, not war. Their slender hands had never built weapons strong enough for battle, only instruments for music and devices for healing. But peace, they were learning, could be fragile. That night, the stars above their capital city of Lyrian trembled with light that was not their own. Ships massive and cold fell from orbit. They belonged to the Tarkun Dominion, a species known across the sectors for conquest. They were merciless, their fleets dark as obsidian, their intentions clear. When the first bombardment struck the outer defense domes, the ground shook. Virelia's skies turned orange. The people who had once sung to the stars now screamed beneath them. Inside the grand communication tower, Elira, the planet's chief of stellar signals, struggled to keep her hands steady. Her long silver fingers danced over glowing panels as explosions shook the tower. "System failure in the north grid," shouted one of her assistants, voice trembling. Elira's pale eyes turned toward the holographic map. Entire regions were blinking red. "Reroute all power to the primary beacon," she said quickly. "We must send the distress signal before it's too late." "But the Allies," another voice cried. "Yes," Elira interrupted softly. "The Zoran coalition will hear us. They have always promised help. They will come." Outside, another explosion lit the night. Elira activated the SOS beacon, her heart racing as she transmitted the message into the void. Her voice, though calm, carried the fear of her people. "To any Zoran coalition ship within range, Virelia is under attack by the Tarkun Dominion. Our defenses are collapsing. We need immediate assistance. Please, anyone, please respond." The message repeated again and again, echoing through space like a heartbeat. When the transmission left Virelia's atmosphere, it passed through the wreckage of fallen ships, through the glowing trails of plasma fire, and into the dark sea of stars. Hours passed. The skies continued to burn. No one responded. The Tarkun ground troops landed near dawn. They were mechanical beasts of war, armored and precise. The Virelians could do nothing but retreat underground, into the crystal caverns that ran beneath the city. Elira stayed behind in the tower with a few others, hoping to boost the signal again. The beacon flickered weakly, its core struggling for energy. She whispered, as if speaking to the stars themselves. "Please, someone, hear us." Far away, light years from Virelia, on the edge of human-controlled space, a deep space listening post caught something unusual. "Signal detected," said the operator aboard the UHS Ardent, a monitoring vessel orbiting a barren moon. The ship was crewed by humans, members of what most alien races called Deathworlders, the only species evolved on a planet so hostile that even their plants could kill. The operator frowned as the alien message played through the translator. "It's an SOS origin. Planet Virelia. Non-human, seems urgent." The captain, Commander Rowan Hale, walked into the room. He was tall, with lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the kind that came from years of seeing too much. "Virelia," he repeated. "Never heard of it. Who are they calling?" "They mentioned the Zoran coalition, sir." "Looks like the signal wasn't meant for us." Rowan folded his arms, thinking. The Zoran were pacifists, too far away to respond quickly. The message would take weeks to reach them. By then it would be too late. "Replay the message," he ordered. The alien voice filled the room again. It was trembling but dignified. The translation came through in clear English. "Please, anyone, please respond." The room fell silent. Rowan's second officer, Lieutenant Vega, looked uneasy. "Sir, we're not part of any alliance with them. If we answer, it could pull us into another interstellar conflict." Rowan nodded slowly. "Maybe. But if we don't, an entire world dies." He turned toward the stars displayed on the main screen. "Plot a course. I want to see what's happening out there." The operator blinked. "Sir, that's a Deathworlder command fleet's job, not ours. We're just a listening post." Rowan smiled faintly. "Then I guess today we stop listening and start doing something." Back on Virelia, the situation worsened. The Tarkun Dominion surrounded the planet completely. From orbit, their ships unleashed controlled destruction. Burning forests, shattering cities, silencing hope. In the underground shelters, frightened families huddled together. Children clung to their parents as distant rumbles shook the tunnels. Elira sat near the beacon console, her eyes fixed on the fading light of the transmitter. One of her assistants whispered, "We should give up. No one is coming." But Elira shook her head gently. "Hope is the last light that fades. Until then, we keep it burning." Her assistant said nothing more. Hours turned to days. Food grew scarce. Communications fell silent. The skies were filled with smoke, the moons dimmed behind clouds of ash, and then, just as the last beacon pulse flickered, a new signal appeared. A soft chime echoed through the control room. Elira's heart skipped a beat. "Is that?" She opened the channel and a rough human voice came through the static. "This is Commander Rowan Hale of the United Human Fleet. We received your distress signal. We're en route." Elira froze, barely breathing. "Humans?" she whispered. Her assistants looked terrified. The name Deathworlders carried fear throughout the galaxy. Stories said they came from a world where survival meant strength beyond imagination, a species that fought even nature itself. Some called them savages. Others called them miracles. Elira swallowed hard. "You received our signal?" "Affirmative. We're about 12 hours out. Hold on as long as you can. Reinforcements are following." She closed her eyes, tears forming. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of something she hadn't dared feel: hope. On the UHS Ardent, the crew worked quickly, preparing for possible combat. The small vessel couldn't take on a Tarkoon fleet alone, but Rowan knew he wouldn't have to. He had already sent the SOS through the human command network. He knew the Deathworlders' response time. Humans never ignored distress signals. Not after what they'd endured in their own history: wars, extinctions, collapses, and recoveries. Every generation carried a memory of fighting for survival. If someone was calling for help, it didn't matter whose voice it was. "ETA, Vega?" Rowan asked. 11 hours, sir. We're entering Varelian sector soon. The Dominion has a heavy presence. We'll be outnumbered." Rowan smiled grimly. "That's never stopped us before." Back on the surface, Elira gathered the remaining survivors in the cavern. Someone answered. She told them softly. "The humans are coming." Murmurs filled the air. Some were relieved, others afraid. An elder named Seran frowned. "Deathworlders? You trust them? Their history is full of violence. What if they come to conquer, not to save?" Elira met his gaze. "Maybe. But I have seen enough death to know that even the fiercest hearts can choose mercy." Her words hung in the silence. Outside, the night sky flickered again. Not with fire this time, but with light. Dozens of new ships were breaking through warp space, engines blazing like comets. At first, the Tarkoon fleet turned their weapons toward the newcomers, and then the Deathworlders' fleet answered. From the darkness, human warships emerged, massive angular vessels forged for survival. Their hulls were scarred from ancient wars. Their presence alone shifted the stars. The Tarkoon commanders hesitated. Even they knew of the humans, the race from the death world Terra, who turned pain into progress and destruction into strength. "Identification confirmed," one of the Tarkoon captains said coldly. "Deathworlders. Engage them," came the command, and the sky erupted. Beams of light crossed the heavens as human and Tarkoon ships collided in the upper atmosphere. The air burned. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the valleys. In the caverns, Varelians covered their ears, praying to the stars. Elira stood at the cave's edge, watching through a cracked viewport. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with wonder. For the first time, she saw what humans truly were, not monsters, not myths, but beings of fire and will. The Deathworlders had answered, and Varelia's fate was about to change forever. The sky of Varelia was no longer silent. It burned with streaks of fire and flashes of light as human and Tarkoon ships clashed above the clouds. The once calm and glowing heavens had turned into a storm of war. Deep beneath the surface, the people of Varelia waited, their hearts trembling with every sound from above. They had never heard such thunder before. The caves vibrated with distant explosions. Elira stood near the entrance of the cavern, staring at the faint light leaking through cracks in the rock. Behind her, children whispered prayers, their parents holding them close. A young Varelian soldier, barely more than a boy, ran toward her. Chief Elira. The outer sensors show movement. Something's landing near the valley. Her pulse quickened. Is it the Tarkun? He hesitated. No, it's something else. The ships don't match their patterns, Elira's eyes widened. Humans. Above the surface, the UHS Ardent descended through the smoky atmosphere. Commander Rowan Hale stood on the bridge watching the burning planet below. Visuals on the ground? He asked. Lieutenant Vega pointed at the holographic screen. The Tarkun have established control over most of the eastern hemisphere. Civilians are scattered in the western valleys. That's where the beacon originated. Good, Rowan said. That's where we'll land. The ship trembled as it broke through the atmosphere. Flames licked the edges of the hull. Below he could see the silver forest now blackened with ash. He took a slow breath. Prepare the drop team. We'll make contact, Vega blinked. Sir, personally? Rowan nodded. If they're terrified of us, they need to see a face that doesn't wear a helmet first. Not a weapon. The Ardent landed in a clearing surrounded by twisted metal and burned soil. The ramp opened with a hiss, releasing a cloud of steam into the air. The first humans stepped out, wearing reinforced armor that shimmered like midnight steel. Their boots crunched against the ash. The Deathworlders had arrived. They moved with calm precision, scanning the horizon for threats. Yet despite their intimidating appearance, their movements were protective, measured, not aggressive. Rowan stepped forward, removing his helmet. The air was heavy and metallic but breathable. His short dark hair was streaked with ash, his eyes sharp but kind. Let's find them, he said. In the caverns, Elira's group watched the scene unfold on a small holo projector. The feed came from one of the few working surface drones. When the first image of humans appeared on the screen, the room went silent. The humans were tall, strong, and heavily armored. Their faces looked tired, older than their years, marked by a life of survival. An elder whispered, "Monsters." Elira didn't answer. She kept watching, her eyes focused on the human who stood in front, the one who had spoken to her through the transmission. Commander Rowan. His expression wasn't cruel. It was something else, something she couldn't quite name, perhaps. Compassion? She turned to the young soldier beside her. We're going to meet them. He stared at her in disbelief. Chief, that's too dangerous. What if She cut him off softly. They answered our call when no one else did. That's reason enough to trust. Above ground, the human team was setting up portable scanners when they detected movement. Commander, Vega said, holding her tablet. We've got life signs, multiple, coming from the ridge ahead. Probably the survivors, Rowan nodded. Weapons down. Helmets off. We approach slow. They walked forward through the dust until figures began to appear through the smoke. At first, they looked like ghosts, tall and slender, their skin faintly luminous in the dim light. The Varelians stepped carefully out of hiding, their silver eyes watching every move. Rowan raised his hand in greeting. We come in peace? My name is Commander Rowan Hale, United Human Fleet. Elira stepped forward. Her long white robe was covered in dust, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. I am Elira of Varelia, Chief of Stellar Signals. You answered our call. Rowan nodded once. We did, and we'll help you. For a long moment, no one moved. The air between them was thick with tension. Both species had heard stories of each other, stories full of fear. Then slowly, Elira extended her hand. Her fingers were delicate and glowing faintly blue. Rowan looked at it, then gently took her hand in his own. Her skin was cool against his. His was warm and rough. Two worlds met in that single touch. Thank you, she said softly, for coming. Rowan smiled faintly. You called for help. That's all we needed to know. Hours later, human soldiers helped the Varelians move supplies and repair damaged shelters. For many aliens, it was their first time standing near a human. At first, the Varelians kept their distance. Children peeked out from behind their parents, curious but afraid. The humans, though strong and heavily armed, spoke gently. One of the soldiers, Private Leon, knelt beside a group of frightened children and offered them water from his canteen. The youngest child hesitated, then took a sip and smiled shyly. The simple act broke the tension. Slowly, the fear began to fade. Elira watched the scene with quiet awe. The Deathworlders were not what she had imagined. They were scarred and powerful, yes, but they were also kind. Rowan approached her. We've established a temporary shield perimeter. It should hold against orbital strikes. She looked up at him. You risked your fleet for us. Why? He thought for a moment before answering. Because we've been where you are now. Long ago, humanity almost destroyed itself. We know what it feels like to lose everything. So now when someone cries for help, we answer. Elira lowered her gaze, her voice soft. You are not as terrible as the story said. He chuckled lightly. We're not as gentle as we wish either. Night fell again over the valley. The sky above still glowed with the fire of distant battle. The Tarkoon Dominion had noticed the human fleet. Their commanders were furious. Across the atmosphere, more Tarkoon warships descended, their engines howling like beasts. Commander, Vega said, running up to Rowan. The Tarkoon are reinforcing. They're not backing down. Rowan looked up at the burning clouds. Then we don't either. He opened the comm line to the human fleet. This is Commander Hale to all units. Defensive positions. Protect the civilians at all costs. The Deathworlders' ships moved in perfect formation. Their shields flared blue as Tarkoon weapons rained down. In the caverns, the ground shook again. Dust fell from the ceiling. But this time, the people did not scream. They knew someone was fighting for them. Elira stood beside the human communication station, listening to the voices on the comms. Steady, determined, human. She felt tears rise to her eyes. Are you afraid? Rowan asked quietly beside her. She nodded. Yes, but less than before. He smiled faintly. That's courage, not absence of fear. Hours later, after countless blasts of energy and roars of engines, the night grew still. The Tarkoon ships began to retreat, dragging their wounded vessels back into orbit. The humans had done it. Against all odds, they had pushed the enemy back. When the dawn came, it painted the horizon with gold and silver light. The air smelled faintly of metal and smoke, but also of survival. The people of Virelia stepped out of their shelters for the first time in days. Above them, human ships hovered like guardians, silent and strong. Rowan stood at the edge of the valley, watching the sunrise. Elira joined him quietly. They are gone, she asked. For now, he said. But they'll be back. The Dominion doesn't accept defeat easily. She looked at him. And you? Will you stay? Rowan glanced at the rising sun. For as long as you need us, she smiled softly. Then perhaps the stories about Deathworlders will change. Maybe, he said, his voice low. But sometimes it's better that they don't. Fear keeps enemies away. She tilted her head. And friends? He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. Friends find their own way through fear. For a long moment they stood together. Two survivors from different worlds watching the light return to a wounded planet. Far above them, the human fleet drifted like silver guardians across the sky. The transmission beacons now glowed with new power, their signals carrying a new message through space, not a cry for help, but a message of hope. The universe had changed the day the Deathworlders answered a call meant for someone else, and Virelia would never forget the sound of their arrival. The dawn after the battle brought silence, a silence that felt strange to the people of Virelia. For days they had heard nothing but explosions and screams. Now there was only the faint hum of the human shields protecting the valley and the soft wind brushing over the scorched ground. Elira stood on a ridge overlooking the plains. The silver leaves of the surviving trees glimmered weakly in the light. Smoke still rose from distant ruins, painting the horizon in gray lines. Behind her, human engineers worked beside Virelian volunteers, repairing communication towers and setting up clean water systems. It was a strange sight. Two species so different moving together with one purpose. Humans were strong and practical, their hands rough and steady. The Virelians were delicate and graceful, their touch light as air. Yet somehow their differences fit together perfectly. Elira smiled faintly as she watched a young human soldier lift a heavy beam, while a Virelian engineer directed him. They laughed when the beam slipped and crashed into the mud. For a brief moment it felt like peace had returned. Commander Rowan Hale approached from behind her. He was still wearing his dark armor, but his helmet hung at his side. His tired eyes softened as he looked around at the rebuilding efforts. You've done well, Elira, he said quietly. Your people are strong. She turned to him. We survived because of you. Without the humans, we would all be gone. He shook his head. You called for help. That took courage. We just answered. For a moment, they stood together in silence. watching the sunrise reflect off the shield barrier that shimmered faintly above them. "Will your fleet stay?" she asked. "As long as it takes," he said. "Our command sent reinforcements. More ships will arrive in a few days. Until then, we'll hold this position." Elira hesitated. "And after that?" Rowan looked at the horizon. "After that? Maybe you won't need us anymore." Her voice softened. "Maybe we'll still want you here." Rowan didn't answer, but there was a faint smile on his face. By midday, human medics had opened a small field hospital inside an old Varelian hall. The once beautiful building now had cracks running through its crystal walls, but it still stood strong. Elira walked among the injured, helping where she could. The humans had brought advanced medical equipment, and their doctors worked tirelessly. One of them, Dr. Yara, was kneeling beside a Varelian child with a broken arm. "Hold still, little one," Yara said gently, her voice calm. The child winced but didn't cry. Elira watched in awe as Yara wrapped the wound with glowing medical tape that fused the skin instantly. The child blinked in surprise and smiled. Elira said softly, "Your technology is remarkable." Yara smiled back. "Technology helps, but kindness heals faster." Those words stayed in Elira's heart long after she left the hall. Outside, Rowan was speaking with his second officer, Lieutenant Vega. "The Dominion fleet hasn't withdrawn completely," Vega said, tapping the holographic display. "They're regrouping beyond the moon's orbit." "I think they're waiting for reinforcements," Rowan frowned. "So this isn't over yet?" "No, sir. But the Varelians are trusting us now." "They're looking to you," Rowan sighed. "That's what worries me." Vega raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because the universe isn't kind," he said quietly. "When people start believing in us too much, it means they've run out of hope of their own." That evening, Elira found Rowan sitting alone near the shield generator, looking up at the stars. The air was cool and the night was clear. She approached silently, her long robe brushing against the grass. "You look troubled," she said. Rowan glanced at her. "Just thinking. About the battle?" He nodded slowly. "About what comes next." Elira sat beside him. "You humans fight with such strength. But I sense sadness in your eyes." He gave a small laugh. "You're observant," she tilted her head. "Is it because of your world?" "I've heard stories. Humans live on a planet that even your own nature tries to destroy." He smiled faintly. "That's one way to say it. We call it Earth. Our world taught us to survive, storms, volcanoes, beasts, our own mistakes. Maybe that's why the galaxy calls us Deathworlders." Elira's voice softened. "But you saved lives here. How can death bring life?" Rowan looked up at the stars. "Maybe we had to live with danger so we could learn compassion. Pain teaches mercy better than comfort ever could." Elira was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You sound more like a philosopher than a soldier." He laughed softly. "Maybe I'm both. Or maybe I'm just tired," she smiled. "Even tired hearts can give light." Their eyes met in the dim glow of the shield barrier. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was only peace, fragile but real. The next day, alarms echoed through the camp. "Commander," Vega shouted through the comm. "We've got incoming dropships, Tarkoon ground units." Rowan jumped to his feet, grabbing his rifle. "Positions! Protect the civilians!" Elira's heart pounded as human soldiers rushed past her, forming defensive lines. The skies turned red as the Tarkoon ships entered the atmosphere. The battle returned. From the hills, fire rained down. Human anti-air cannons roared, shooting streaks of light across the sky. The ground shook with the impact of explosions. Elira ran toward the medical hall to help the wounded. She saw Rowan leading his troops, his voice calm through the chaos. "Hold the west line," he shouted. "Don't let them through." The humans fought fiercely. Their movements were quick, their teamwork perfect. Despite the Tarkoon's numbers, the Deathworlders did not fall back. Elira's hands trembled as she helped a wounded soldier, one of the humans this time. His armor was scorched, his face pale. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing a glowing bandage to his wound. He tried to smile. "You're good at this." For someone who said she doesn't fight, she forced a small smile. "We learn fast." Hours passed before the Tarkoon finally retreated. The valley was covered in smoke again, but the shield still stood, cracked but unbroken. Rowan walked through the battlefield, checking his people. Many were injured, but most were alive. When he reached the medical hall, he found Elira still working. her silver skin streaked with dirt, her eyes filled with exhaustion. "You should rest," he said gently. She shook her head. "Not until everyone is safe," he smiled. "You sound like one of us now." Elira looked up at him. "Maybe your courage is catching." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, surrounded by the quiet after chaos. Then Elira's expression grew serious. "Commander, how long can we keep fighting?" "The Tarkun will not stop," Rowan nodded. "I know, that's why we're calling for more help. The fleet from Terra is on its way." She hesitated. "Will they come?" "They always do," he said softly. "Humans never ignore a call for help, no matter who sends it." Her heart warmed at his words. The universe suddenly felt less empty. That night, the survivors held a small gathering near the center of the camp. The air was filled with the faint hum of power generators and the soft glow of rebuilt lanterns. A human musician took out a small device, an ancient guitar. The sound that came from it was soft and emotional. The notes drifted across the valley like whispers of peace. The Varelians listened in wonder. Their own music was made of crystals and light, not strings and wood. Yet this sound touched their hearts in a way they had never felt before. Elira closed her eyes, letting the melody carry her. Rowan sat nearby, cleaning his gear. When the song ended, Elira said softly, "Your music feels like sorrow and hope at the same time." "That's what it is," Rowan said. "Sorrow for what we've lost. Hope for what we can still save." She smiled faintly. "Then we share the same song." As the night deepened, the stars above seemed brighter. The shield reflected their light like a fragile glass dome. Rowan stood alone for a moment, looking at the stars, thinking of Earth, of oceans, winds, and storms. He wondered if humanity had finally found its purpose not in fighting, but in protecting. Elira joined him again, quiet as the breeze. "Do you ever miss your home?" she asked. "Every day," he said softly. "But when I see what we can do out here, maybe this is home too." She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Then perhaps the universe sent you for a reason." He smiled. Maybe the universe just needed someone stubborn enough to listen. They stood together in silence. Two souls from worlds apart, bound by the same wish, to protect life, no matter where it came from. And though the stars still burned from war, in that valley of ash and hope something new began to grow. Not fear. Not survival, but trust. The days after the second attack were heavy and quiet. The air of Varelia still smelled of smoke, but life continued to move, slowly, carefully, like a wounded creature learning to walk again. The humans had built a new command base near the valley. Large silver tents stood beside Varelian crystal shelters, shining together under the twin moons. The sound of rebuilding filled the air, metal being hammered, circuits repaired, and voices filled with cautious hope. But everyone knew peace was fragile. The Tarkun Dominion had not been defeated. They were only waiting, gathering strength beyond the horizon of space. Commander Rowan Hale stood inside the command tent, studying a holographic map. Red dots, enemy signals, were moving closer to the planet again. His face was calm, but his eyes showed quiet worry. Lieutenant Vega stepped beside him. "The Dominion fleet has doubled in size, sir. They'll reach orbit in less than 40 hours. Rowan didn't move for a moment. 40 hours, he repeated softly. "That's not much time." "No, sir," Vega said. "But the fleet from Terra hasn't arrived yet. We're still outnumbered." Rowan exhaled slowly. "Then we'll hold them until help comes." "We've done worse with less," Vega nodded. "Understood." Outside, Elira walked among her people. The Varelians were working alongside human engineers, repairing the damaged shield generators. Her silver hair shone faintly under the sun, though her eyes were tired. Everywhere she looked, she saw signs of hope and of fear. Children laughed near human medics, learning to say human words. Farmers were replanting silver trees in the burned soil, but above them the sky always carried a faint red glow, a reminder that the Tarkun were still out there. She found Rowan standing alone near a ridge, watching the clouds. "You can't rest, can you?" she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Rest feels dangerous. Every time I close my eyes, I think of the next battle." "You carry too much weight," Elira said. "You saved us, but you don't allow yourself to feel peace." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "Peace isn't something soldiers get to keep. We only hold it long enough to give it to someone else." Her heart ached at his words. "And what happens to you when the war ends?" Rowan turned back to the sky. Then we move on to the next place that needs us. That night a storm came, not of fire but of rain. It was the first rainfall since the invasion began. The silver leaves of the surviving trees glistened as droplets danced across the valley. Humans and Varelians stood under makeshift roofs, watching the waterfall. To the Varelians, it was a sacred symbol of renewal. To the humans, it was simply beautiful. Elira stood outside, her arms open to the sky. "Our world remembers how to heal," she said softly. Rowan watched her from a distance. For the first time, he saw her not just as the leader of a broken people, but as a soul of light who refused to give up. When she noticed him, she smiled. "You should enjoy it too. On your world, do you have rain like this?" He walked closer, water running down his armor. "Sometimes, but not this peaceful." She tilted her head. "Then you'll remember Varelia every time it rains," he smiled. "Maybe I will." The next morning, the quiet ended. "Commander." Vega's voice came through the comm channel. "Enemy fleet emerging from warp space, 5 carriers, multiple destroyers." Rowan's calm expression hardened. "All units to battle stations. Activate surface defenses. Evacuate civilians to the lower caverns." Elira's heart pounded. "They've returned," she whispered. "Yes," Rowan said. "And this time they're coming to finish it." From orbit, the Tarkoon ships began their assault. Beams of red light pierced through the clouds, striking the surface. The human fleet moved into formation, meeting the enemy with bright flashes of blue energy. The sky became a storm of light once again. Rowan watched the battle feed from the command base. "Status?" Vega replied. "Our upper shield is holding, but not for long. The Tarkoon are targeting the generators directly." Rowan made a decision. "I'll take a strike team to the North Ridge and hold them off. That's where the generator core is exposed." Vega frowned. "Sir, that's a direct combat zone. You'll be trapped if the enemy surrounds you." He gave a faint smile. "Then we won't let them surround us." Elira stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." Rowan shook his head. "No, you're their leader." "They need you safe." She met his gaze firmly. "And you need someone who knows the terrain." "I'll go." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close." The transport ship soared through the smoky sky, carrying Rowan, Elira, Vega, and a small squad of soldiers. They landed near the northern ridge where the generator hummed weakly beneath the ground. The air was filled with dust and fire. Tarkoon machines crawled across the hills like shadows, their red eyes glowing. "Positions," Rowan ordered. "We hold this ridge no matter what." The humans formed a defensive line. Their weapons glowed blue as they fired at the advancing machines. The ground shook with every blast. Elira stayed near the generator controls, her hands moving quickly over the glowing panels. "I can reroute power from the southern grid," she shouted. Rowan nodded. "Do it!" Vega called out. "Incoming right flank." Explosions rocked the ground. The humans pushed forward, their armor scorched but their spirits unbroken. The Tarkoon forces were relentless, but so were the Deathworlders. Elira's eyes darted across the readings. "The shield is collapsing. I need more time." Rowan fired another shot and shouted, "You've got it!" "We'll hold them." Minutes felt like hours. The battle roared like a storm. Finally, Elira looked up, her voice trembling but hopeful. "The power is stable. The shield is back online." Rowan smiled briefly. "Good work." But before he could finish, a bright red beam struck the ridge. The blast threw him to the ground. The explosion tore through the rocks, sending shards flying. Elira screamed, running toward him. "Rowan!" He pushed himself up slowly, his armor cracked. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth. But then he saw it. One of the Tarkoon dropships descending directly toward the generator. "Vega," he shouted. "That ship can't reach the core. If it detonates, it'll destroy the shield and the valley." Vega looked at the readings. "We can't stop it in time." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Yes, we can." He turned toward Elira, his voice calm but heavy. "You said your people believe the stars remember every act of courage?" She frowned, her voice shaking. "Yes, why?" He gave her a soft smile. "Then maybe the stars will remember this." Before she could stop him, he ran toward the generator platform. "Commander!" Vega shouted. Rowan climbed into the control pod, overriding the safety systems. He set the generator's outer field to overload, creating a massive energy barrier that would stop the dropship, but at a terrible cost. Elira's voice trembled. "Rowan, what are you doing?" He looked at her one last time through the glass. "Buying you time, don't," she cried, pressing her hands against the glass. "There must be another way." He shook his head gently. "There always is. But not today." He pressed the final command. The generator core blazed with light brighter than the sun. The dropship collided with the barrier and disintegrated in a burst of blue fire. The explosion was blinding, echoing across the valley. When the light faded, the ridge was silent. The shield still stood. The valley was safe. But the control pod was gone. Illyra fell to her knees, her heart breaking. Vega knelt beside her, her voice low. "He saved everyone." Tears filled Illyra's eyes. "He promised he'd stay, until we didn't need him." Vega placed a hand on her shoulder. He kept that promise. Hours later, when the battle ended, the humans and Varelians stood together in silence at the ridge. The rain began to fall again, gentle and endless. Illyra lifted her face to the sky, letting the drops mix with her tears. "You were right," she whispered. "Peace isn't something soldiers keep. They give it to others." From orbit, the human reinforcements finally arrived. The Terran fleet descended like a storm of light, driving away the remaining Tarkun ships. The war for Varelia was over, but victory felt heavy. The humans built a small memorial on the ridge, a simple stone with an engraving, "Commander Rowan Hale." He answered the call. Every evening, Illyra came to the ridge and looked at the stars. Sometimes she thought she saw a faint glimmer, a light that seemed to flicker in the shape of a man's smile. Maybe the stars really did remember courage. The war was over. The skies of Varelia were finally quiet. No red light burned through the clouds. No enemy ships darkened the stars. For the first time in months, the planet breathed in peace, but peace was not silent. It carried the sounds of rebuilding, the hum of machines, the laughter of children, the low songs of Varelian workers repairing their crystal cities. Above all, it carried memory. Commander Rowan Hale's name was spoken everywhere, not as a war hero, but as a symbol of something deeper: sacrifice, kindness, and hope. The memorial at the northern ridge had grown. Where once there was only a stone with his name, now stood a garden. Silver trees replanted from the burned forests grew in a perfect circle around the stone. Blue and white flowers from both worlds were placed there every morning, some by Varelians, some by humans. Illyra visited often. Sometimes she came alone, sometimes with children who wanted to hear the story again. She always told it gently, never with sorrow, but with gratitude. "Rowan Hale," she would begin, "was not from our world. His people were called the Deathworlders because their home was harsh and unforgiving. But he was proof that even in the hardest worlds, compassion can grow." The children would listen wide-eyed, their delicate antennae glowing faintly in awe. One small boy once asked, "Will the humans ever come back?" Illyra smiled softly. "They never left. Their ships may have gone home, but their friendship is still here." She placed a hand over her heart. "They left it with us. Months passed. The alliance between Varelia and Terra grew stronger. Trade ships began to travel between the two worlds. Human scientists came to study Varelian energy systems, and Varelian healers taught their knowledge of light therapy to human medics. The galaxy began to change. Where once fear had divided species, now the story of the SOS signal and the Deathworlders' response had become a legend, a reminder that kindness could come from the most unexpected places. Captain Vega remained on Varelia, commanding a small outpost. She had promised Rowan before the battle that she would protect this world, and she meant to keep that promise. One morning, she found Illyra standing on the balcony of the rebuilt council tower, gazing at the horizon. "You're up early," Vega said, walking over. Illyra smiled faintly. "Sleep feels strange now." "The silence is new," Vega nodded. "I know what you mean. On Earth, we call it the quiet after the storm." Illyra looked toward the sky. "Do you ever think he knew that his act would change so much?" Vega folded her arms. "Rowan never cared about history. He cared about doing what was right. That's why it worked." They stood together for a while, watching the twin suns rise over the valley. The light caught the silver trees, making them glow like stars. Illyra whispered, "Sometimes I hear his voice in the wind." Vega smiled gently. "Maybe that's just the universe saying thank you." In the months that followed, the humans and Varelians built a new research facility called the Haven Project. It was located near the northern ridge, half military base, Half Peace Institute. Its goal was simple: to ensure that what happened on Virelia would never happen again. Young humans and Virelians trained together, learning not only about science and defense but about each other's ways of life. They studied compassion, unity, and the value of life in all its forms. One of the students, a young human cadet named Lena Hale, carried a special burden. She was Rowan's younger sister. She had joined the Terran Academy after receiving the message of her brother's final mission. When she heard how he died saving an alien world, she decided to continue his legacy. Now she stood on the same ridge where he had made his sacrifice. Elira stood beside her. Lena looked out over the valley, her voice soft. He always said he wanted to see the stars from another world. I guess he got his wish, Elira smiled warmly. He saw more than stars. He saw hope. Lena knelt and placed a silver medal on the memorial stone. He gave everything he had, she whispered. But he left us something more powerful than any weapon. Elira looked at her curiously. What did he leave? Lena stood slowly, her eyes bright. Faith. That we're not as different as we think. As time passed, humans began to adapt to Virelia's soft atmosphere and glowing landscapes. Some stayed permanently, forming small colonies near the southern oceans. Virelians welcomed them as family. Together, they built new cities that combined both architectures, crystal and steel, light and shadow. The blending of two worlds created beauty that neither could have built alone. In these cities, children of both species played together under the twin moons, learning both languages, laughing in both ways, and every year, on the anniversary of the Great Battle, the people gathered at the ridge for a ceremony called the Day of the Signal. No one celebrated war that day. They celebrated unity. On one such anniversary, many years later, the stars above Virelia shone brighter than usual. The crowd gathered near the ridge, holding small glowing lanterns. Elira, now older but still graceful, stood at the center of the circle. Beside her was Captain Vega, whose hair had turned silver like the Virelian trees. And among the crowd stood Lena, now an ambassador between both worlds. She carried a small data crystal, the same one that had once recorded the SOS signal. Elira began to speak, her voice calm but full of feeling. Years ago, our people cried for help. We sent a signal into the void, not knowing who would hear us. We hoped for friends, but we found something greater. We found humanity. The crowd listened in silence. The humans came to us not because of duty, but because they could not ignore suffering. They answered a call that was not theirs, and in doing so, they became part of our story forever. She looked toward the stars, where the light shimmered gently. They called themselves Deathworlders, she continued, but to us they became life-bringers. The crowd raised their lanterns, and hundreds of lights floated into the sky. Vega spoke next. Rowan Hale was one of us, but he belongs to you too. He showed us that strength without kindness is meaningless, and that courage without love is empty. Her voice trembled slightly, but she smiled. He'd hate this ceremony. He'd say we should be fixing something instead. A ripple of soft laughter spread through the crowd. Elira nodded. Perhaps he is fixing something even now, in every heart that remembers what he stood for. Later that night, when the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Elira remained behind. She stood by the memorial, the wind brushing her hair. Lena approached quietly. You always stay after everyone leaves, Elira smiled softly. Someone has to keep watch. Lena looked up at the stars. Do you think he'd be proud of what we built? Elira turned toward her. I don't think he'd want pride. He'd want peace, and I think we've finally given him that. They stood in silence for a moment. The stars above shimmered like gentle waves. Then, as if in answer, a small streak of light crossed the sky, a shooting star, bright and swift. Lena smiled faintly. He always did like making an entrance, Elira's eyes glistened. Or perhaps a reminder. They both watched the fading light until it vanished into the horizon. Far beyond, in the quiet of deep space, the Terran flagship Aurora sailed through the stars. Inside its observation deck, Captain Vega recorded a message. To the people of Virelia, she said, her voice steady. The Terran fleet will always stand ready, not as guardians but as friends. The universe is wide and peace is fragile. But if one signal could bring two worlds together, imagine what thousands could do. She ended the message, her hand resting on the console. Outside the window, the stars glowed softly, and for a brief second she thought she saw the faint outline of a man's reflection. A calm face, a quiet smile. "Rest easy, Commander," she whispered. "We'll take it from here." Years turned into decades. Viralia became a symbol of unity across the stars. The words of Rowan Hale were now engraved on countless worlds. Peace isn't something soldiers keep. We only hold it long enough to give it to someone else. Those words guided explorers, diplomats and dreamers alike. And somewhere, in the quiet between galaxies, perhaps the stars truly did remember. A single act of courage, born from compassion, echoing forever through time.